University, where I do research and lecture on anything related to information management and information systems. But I always try to get as much as I can into the field and study how information actually works in operations and ideally contribute to it. There's also my background is IT or computer engineering or computer software and programming. But over the years, I've become more interested in how those technologies actually work for people or don't. In my experience, computers do what you tell them. They follow instructions. It's usually when people start interacting with computer systems where either the challenges or the opportunities arise. So that is a bit of my interest, is what we call socio-technical systems. How do people and technology work together? But today, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI, and the reason for that, and I think that's also where the question from Lucien and also from Peter came in, was that I did my UNDAC refresher last year in China. And this is the group that was there. And one of the things, lazy as I was and jet lagged as I was, I wanted to, focus on the content. So I started using ChatGPT during the exercise. And one of the things we've done, we got no spoiler alert for those who still need to go on the training. But as you know, with any exercise or any training, you get documents, you get updates, and I just started photographing them and feeding them into ChatGPT. Not only that, I also started adding the UNDAC manual and all the digital information I could find about UNDAC and UNOCHA that would be relevant. So I was feeding that throughout, every time we got an update throughout the week, basically. And since that all that information was contained in the chatbot, I could ask questions like, could you provide me with a situation overview? Could you help the team to brief on the latest status? Or could you prepare an agenda for me for a meeting with a high-level official? So basically, here's the whole chat. So I'll scroll up a bit. But yeah, you can see I've uploaded the pictures. I've asked it many questions. I've given it feedback. Here I uploaded the latest UNDAC handbook, which was introduced at the training. And basically, we could go back and forth the entire week as a sort of second brain to me. So I think that was also a bit of the trigger for this session is, yeah, that's interesting. How would that work for UNDAC? What potential could we have here? So this is also a bit of the objective of today's session. It's hopefully to get the conversation started on how and when do we use AI for the UNDAC community. I also want to provide you with some basic background knowledge or terminology that might be handy to have and some practical tips. As Lucien said, we also have a panel later where we show some implementation of AI in different tools that are currently being used or explored. But we also hope to open the floor to your own experience and insights, and potentially develop avenues for follow-up. So the agenda, we've done a bit of introduction. I will give you in a minute a bit of background. For some of you that might already be known and familiar, for others it might be new. And then we talk about different use cases for AI. We'll have a short break and then we'll go into the panel, and then hopefully at the end we'll have enough time to at least discuss what your views are. Related to that, some expectations. I've looked at the attendee list, and yeah, as the UNDAC community is very diverse, it ranges from people that I highly appreciate, but who are technically challenged sometimes, their own words, to people that are very familiar and using technology on a daily basis or even developing it for UNOCHA. So it was a bit hard for me to design a session that would cater to both audiences, but hopefully there will be room to cover both views and make it interesting for everyone. We're not going to go too deep into the technology. We're mainly going to talk about where do we see the potential, right? In the end, that will be interesting to have. Where do we see potential? Where do we see concerns or things that are stopping us? And how should we go about addressing them? So we might not be able to cover everything in this session, but we'll note, we record, and we can always see if we want to follow up within the community, right? If people say, oh, I would love to have a more detailed training on prompt engineering, that's something I'm happy to facilitate. For those of you who are more technically inclined, yeah, there will be some oversimplification on AI in the slides as well there. If you do want to speak up, you can use the chat or raise your hand. There's a lot of people on the call, so I would not recommend just randomly unmuting, but Lucien and I were tracking who is raising the hand, and we'll get to it as much as we can within the time. And most of all, it's also about sharing experiences. I will get to that in a minute, but AI is very much under development, but nothing is set in stone yet. It is something that we can shape ourselves. And just be aware that if you do speak up, as I said, please mute if not speaking. But if you do speak up, be aware that the session is recorded. So any comments you make may end up in a public video or being shared. So before we go into all this, I just wanted to ask the audience to get a little bit of understanding of what you do with AI. So I will put, there's a QR code there, but I will also put a link in the chat. And I would love for you to join me on that website, because I have a few questions for you. So I see about 92 people in this call, so I hope that most of you will be able to join that website. Either you can use your phone with the QR code, or you can use the link that I've just posted in the chat. Yeah, I see about 50 people joining. All right. Give it a few more seconds and you can keep joining throughout. So my first question is actually to get a bit of an idea. Have you used AI tools yourself? Did you use it just to experiment? You can vote on multiple options. So did you use it to experiment yourself? Did you use it to boost your own productivity? And to give you an example, the name of my second son, which was born right after the UNDAC refresher course, was generated with ChatGPT. So that will be either fun or productivity case.
Kenny, I think now we want to know what's the name of your son.
Yeah, it's Linden. My brain wasn't working anymore, so then it's nice to at least use it for brainstorming at that point. Okay, nice to see that most of you have used it. See, many people also used it as in your professional experience, and even some with a technical background. Few people not at all. Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious if you've used it, which ones have you used? And then I know I'm saying AI and I'm listing specific tools here, but I'll get to that in a minute. Which ones have you used? Yeah, I see people also adding comments there. Great. Notebook LM. Yeah. So ChatGPT is OpenAI, ChatGPT, the clear winner. See, many people said it was the first one. It's free. Great. All right, that gives me an idea. So when you were first using it, did it help? Were you more productive, or was it just fun but not really helpful? Were you disappointed, or was it scary? Yeah, I can relate to the scary part initially. If you see how it, even if you know how the technology works, it can be a bit eerie. But I see most people see the benefits there as well. Great. So the last one, and I will leave this open so I can refer to it later. So I'll leave this question on while I continue. Is there anything you would like today uh, in this session to be covered? Yeah, privacy. Some keywords are just fine. This accuracy, safely. Talk about Gannett. Okay. Okay, so a lot of people with the privacy and the concerns, the use on missions. Great. So as I said, I'll leave this open so we know what's coming up, and later at the end we'll come back to this. So thank you for sharing that. So as I said, let's go a bit into, before we go into the practical use cases for UNDAC, let's go a bit into the background of AI, because there's a lot of talk and a lot of excitement in the world and investments and everybody, if you're not using AI in your products these days, you don't really count anymore, right? It's the hot new thing, but it's not new. New technologies have always emerged and disrupted what we've done as humanitarians. The fax machine, and I'm looking at some of the participants in the list. They may have been there with the introduction of that. Um, that also changed the way that we could send documents around and communicate with each other. Nowadays, we have satellite communication available to us. Uh, we have remote mapping. We're doing more and more with data, even remotely in social media analysis. I remember when I started in the field, it was Andre Verity who sent me that map from based on social media after Typhoon Haiyan. So I think that is key to remember, that UNDAC and the emergency response in general, the mission has not changed, right? But the inclusion of tools to help do that mission changes. There's always been adoption either by the mechanism itself or by working with partners that could provide that, right? It's not that we do satellite connections ourselves. We have partnerships with people who can do it for us. It's not that we do the satellite mapping ourselves. We have people that can work with us. So this is something I want you to remember. It's not about doing all the AI stuff for ourselves. It's also about partnerships. Um, there is a difference, however, that where the uptake of fax took a few years or maybe even a decade, today we see basically an acceleration of new technologies. They emerge faster and they protrude faster throughout the world. There's a much faster uptake that is much wider spread. Um, so especially for AI, right? Where before with cloud, even with the cloud, it took a few years with social media. But now basically in 1.5 or 1 year, AI has become such commonplace that it's not just for the few early adopters. In a year's time, it has become common for everyone to use it, including uh, I would say my parents who just learned to adopt WhatsApp basically. So that also makes it quite uncertain. What is it and how it's going to evolve and how it's going to change the world in general? But there is this theory in technology innovation that while we don't know where it's going, that doesn't mean we can't shape it ourselves. You can nudge it and you can move along with it. And I think that's a key thing. It's AI is not just coming to us that we don't have control over it. We can shape it, we can integrate it, we can nudge this technology, mold it in a way that we want to. But then you do need to understand what it can and cannot do, and do need to understand where it could benefit you. So maybe good to know that this is a survey from a few years ago. How likely is it that your job is going to be taken over, right? That's one of the key questions by AI. Well, good news that emergency management directors are in the top 10 of jobs likely not to be automated or to be overtaken. So I would say that's a good position to be in. But there is this notion among scientists that are in the labor market that AI will not replace you. So the chances that for some of the jobs, definitely, for programming and so on, but the more consensus at the moment is that AI is not going to replace you, but somebody who's using AI will replace you. In other words, if somebody can do your job and be more productive, have better outputs because of their using the technology, they will replace you. It's not new. This has always been the case, but it's more prominent these days. So, it's not about that AI takes over, but it is about people that use AI to be more productive, that, challenge the job market. Something else on the background. So the history of AI, a lot has been written about this, but it's good to know that from a scientific point of view, AI is not new. The term and the concept was first really formalized and introduced in the 1960s at the Dartmouth conference, where they looked at intelligence, what it is, and how computing power and algorithms and programming code could mimic or duplicate that intelligence. And that one of the things that already existed was the first chatbot, and this was in the 1960s, Eliza. So the screenshot at the top there. But after the 1960s, 70s, that AI, went underground. It wasn't really prominent anymore. It took a lot of computer power. It was something that was required technical knowledge. It had a very narrow application. It took a lot of effort to get the output. So basically, the return on investment was not interesting enough. So there was this AI winter where nothing really happened. Now, in the late 90s, in the early 20s, computing power went up, and people were able to produce faster and stronger computers, and could run more complex programming. Also, programming became easier. There was more libraries and so on. So this return on investment started to shift the other way. And then you saw that companies started exploring this intelligence again. So you might remember the chess computer that beat the Kasparov, the world's best chess player. That was one of the early implications of some artificial intelligence. A few years later, you had Deep Blue, the IBM Watson, winning on something like Jeopardy by really general knowledge and being able to interpret questions and answer them. And now, since the 2010s, there has been this modern AI boom. Suddenly, this technology is not just for universities or for high computing companies or technological firms, but it's available to everyone. Both the technology, you could develop your own AI models, as well as, companies that offer it to users. So especially in combination with the cloud, there is this mix now that this AI technology has become accessible in terms of technical access and usability, but also affordable and usable to people. So yeah, you saw in the chat, most of you have already done this, used these technologies in some form. So what is next? Yeah, there is this aim for artificial general intelligence. I will talk about that in a minute. But in the short term, we will probably see AI being more integrated into our daily lives and into our services. Some more visible, some less visible, that I'll show you some examples in a minute. So what are the different types of AI? Because we say AI, and basically those who have a technical background always get a bit of an itch. It's basically saying, emergency response is one thing. No, there's different types, different groups that do different things. And the same goes for AI. What we have most these days is what we call narrow AI. It is designed for a specific purpose. ChatGPT is a specific AI tool that generates text. It does one thing, and depending on your experience, it does it well or reasonable, but it's making text. You have AIs that create pictures, DALL-E, for example. But even something like the YouTube algorithm does one thing. It predicts which video you will likely want to watch next. I've included here a picture of the Dutch railways because they also use AI to predict where disruptions are. For those Dutch people among you, it's not hard to predict because it's basically every day, everywhere in our country. But what we're looking for, what people want, is some artificial general AI that is not one specific task, but that can combine, that really understands the human experience, where different elements come together, not just text, not just images, but experiences. And it could do a lot of different things. So this doesn't currently exist. There might be AIs that combine different narrow AIs into one thing, but at the moment there is no such thing as general AI. Why is it good to mention this? Because a lot of people tend to think that AI is this, universal force that will change the world. It's not. It's a collection of small, relatively small applications that work together. Another way to look at what different types of AI are is what they provide in terms of functions and how they're built. So the early examples I showed you about chess computing and IBM Watson, they're reactive AIs. There's rules that they follow, and based on those rules, they calculate what the output would be. So spam filters, for example, do that. There are certain rules that they follow, certain calculations that they make, and based on those calculations, they will give you an output. The other one has some form of memory. So the first one doesn't learn. It reacts to an input. The second one, this limited memory AI, learns. Every time more data gets added, it starts making new connections and it starts learning relationships. So you can think about self-driving cars or the chatbots that we mentioned in the survey earlier. And then there is this one that's connected to general AI, the theory of mind, that it would be able to understand emotion and have thoughts, but that doesn't exist. So zooming in into one specific part of AI, this generative AI, right? So remember, when people say AI, usually they refer to things like ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, right? Or it's at least good to clarify. And these are what we call generative AIs. And there's some terms you might need to know about them. So what we mean by generative AI is that it's an AI, a tool that produces something, whether it's an image or a text or code or audio. It creates usually a digital file that you can use. It doesn't analyze data per se. It is more a prediction. So what they're built on is what we call large language models. You might have heard that term as well, LLMs. That's basically the database behind those generative AIs. That's where the relationships are stored. That's basically the mind of the AI. And some terms you might have heard is GPT-4. If you ever use ChatGPT, you see that list at the top. Those are the different models that they have that you could use. And they have different purposes. Some models are trained for analysis, text analysis. Some are more designed for creativity. Some are designed more for software code. Some are more designed for reporting. So, within the generative AI, you have, especially for text, you have large language models. And they are being offered through what we call chatbots. So the website of ChatGPT is essentially a chatbot. That's the interface to the large language model. But the model is the interesting part. That's where the intelligence happens. The chatbots are the front end where most users interact with. And so what is important to remember about these large language models? It's basically statistics. If you talk about something like generative AI or ChatGPT, it predicts whatever word should follow next. As I said in the beginning, oversimplified, but it basically analyzes a text, uses its large model to predict what word should come next using your input. Right? So there's really no intelligence. It does not understand what it's doing. So that's a little bit of the background. I'll get back to that in a minute, but let's talk about where could we use this. Well, the first one is personal use, right? So generative AI, as a colleague of mine, so this is going more into the use case for those of you who are not familiar with the technology. A friend of mine once said, you should look at it as an unpaid but eager intern who doesn't know anything. So they're tiresome, they will work for you every day and every night, but they don't know what they're doing. So they can work hard as long as you provide them with clear instructions. And I'll give you an example in a minute, right? That also means you should check the output of your intern because, again, it does not understand the context. So clear instructions, checking the output, and then be aware that this intern is also very eager to please. It will likely never say, oh, I don't know. It will always try to produce some output for you. So if you're ever chatting, that's what I keep in the back of my mind. So where could you use this? Well, you could use it for drafting emails. I'm sure some of you have done this. For brainstorming, right? Today's presentation, I used ChatGPT to help me brainstorm the layout of this presentation and how to set it up. You can use it even as a search engine or for translation. And if you have any examples, feel free to share them in the chat of how you've used ChatGPT or those tools. How do you get most useful output? Well, as I said, if you keep that idea of the intern in mind, then there's a few things you could remember. One is called prompt engineering. So you might have noticed that if you just ask a general question, you get very vague answers, or it even hallucinates. But again, keeping that analogy with the intern in mind, the more instructions you provide, background documents, templates, and so on, the better the output will be. This is what we call prompt engineering. So here's an example. You tell the AI what role you want it to be. You're an UNDAC member, you're a team leader, you're a narcissist, whatever you want it to be, right? You're a diplomat. You give it a specific task. I want you to write a report. And again, the more details you add, the better the output will be. It needs to be 2 pages. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be succinct, whatever you need to do. Then you give it instructions how to go about those tasks. And then make sure that the AI understands. So what I usually do is I break tasks into steps and I take the AI with me, like an intern, every step of the way. We are going to go on a mission. First, I'm going to give you a briefing. Right. Now I'm going to give you some background information about what UNDAC is. Here's the manual. Do you understand what we need to do? Summarize it for me. I give it feedback. So it's really a continuous conversation. It's not just firing off one prompt. It's working, as a team member. The example I've given you, and I've talked about now ChatGPT and generative AI, it's just one example. There is a lot of other tools and AIs, and there's this great website. There's an AI for that. And it's actually an AI tool that searches other AI tools. So if you ever have a task and you wonder, it's not just text, it's something else, you can go to this website and you can tell it what you want to do, and it will suggest to you which other websites you could use. So there's thousands and thousands of AI tools ranging from video editing to podcast making to academic analysis to data and programming and so on. I will make sure to make you get the slides, but I'll make sure to compile a list of all the links I've shown you so that you have them as reference. Also, for this prompt engineering, colleague at the university, they made a course where you learn how to do prompt engineering. Okay, so that's for personal use. How about using it in our capacity as an UNDAC member? Again, remember, this is a potential team member that will never get tired, that can work for you, that loves writing things. And even though I usually am an information manager, I hate typing and writing. I always need to clarify people that I'm not a secretary, but so it is great to have somebody in the team who loves going through documents, who loves making text, something that you can outsource. But keep in mind again that this team member does not have experience that you have, that does not have the human sensitivity that we need in a crisis, that always will reply positively to you. So once you start thinking about that, some of the ideas that you could use and that I've used these specifically this generative text-based AIs for is creating reports, keeping the notes in one place, and then asking it to prepare the summary for me, asking it to analyze what the assessments are. But you could even ask it to go back because most of these models are trained on all the data that is on the internet, and a lot of the disaster information is public. So you could ask what is happening, usually in a tsunami, what should we keep in mind? You could ask it to, ask what we've learned from previous disasters and how it applies here. And you could do one thing that I've learned from the fire department in Antwerp is red teaming. You could even ask it to be critical of you. If you have your report, send it and ask, what are we missing here? What am I forgetting? What could we do better? Answer. So I've used this not only in my UNDAC refresher, but also in my EU training as a member of the European Civil Protection Mechanism to keep track of notes. Right? So every note I made, I was adding it to the chat or to a project. It always, if I ever needed to brief the team, I said, Jake, give me the latest status in 5 bullet points. If we got a task, help me to brainstorm how to get around this task, especially if you're tired after a few days. It's really nice to have somebody who's not tired brainstorm with you, develop reports and assumptions. Because for some tasks that we do as UNDAC, we have templates, we have instructions. Some of the text that we send to Geneva or others can be generic, right? So there, it really has a benefit. Yeah, I'll show you the chat later. So, but keep in mind that there are some misconceptions about this AI. So generative AI does not understand the content. It is just word prediction, as I said. They're not per se accurate or factual. Again, it's trying to generate text that it thinks should follow on what has been said. It does, again, it's not sentient, even though it looks like that. And it cannot create original ideas. It's trained on all the knowledge and all the documents that are available on the internet. So it might combine things, but it does not have the concept of original ideas itself. But it can help with productivity. And it depends on the data that's trained. If there is a bias in the data, it will reflect in the output. And it has ethical and social risk. I'll show you an example right before the break in a few minutes. So it is important, again, with this unpaid intern, that you remain the expert, that you have oversight, that you check the output. So what is next? Well, it's not just about using it yourself as a team member. AI is getting integrated into many different things. So I saw Andre is also on the chat from UNOCHA Digital Services. You will see AI being integrated everywhere. There is Google and Google search. For many of you, depending which country you're in, you will now see an AI generated summary. That's at least a very visible part where AI is being integrated. But AI is also increasingly invisible being integrated, not just generative AI or text AI, but also data analysis, customer service, interactions, decision making, and so on. And that's happening much more underground that you don't always see yourself. I set this example of Ask Relief Web, right? That's if you want in the discussion, Andre can explain more about it. But that's one example where this AI layer is being added to existing services. So the last part, in a few minutes, I want to share with you is this ELSA aspects. And it does not refer to Elsa from Frozen, but it's called ethical, legal, and societal aspects. I saw that many of you asked about how does it work with privacy, security, and safety. This is the terminology. Again, my goal is not to tell you what we're going to do with AI, but it's to equip you with the terminology so that you can search for it and participate in the discussions. So this ethical, legal, and societal aspects of AI focuses on what happens if we use AI. part of it that has to do with data sharing, right? It's the same discussion we had a few years ago with Google Drive. If it's a free service, you're probably the product, right? It's using your data to train and to become better. But there's paid versions that have much more control. Copilot from Microsoft or the paid version of ChatGPT, for example. So it is about selecting a tool, and many of those things happening now underground on private accounts, but there's slowly a move. I saw that also to corporate accounts where there's more control. Then the AI itself, one of the key things is if you start using AI for decision making, then it becomes dangerous because it does not understand per se what it's doing. If it would, that's what we call explainable AI. It can tell you how it arrived at a certain output. Right? So that's one aspect that's being explored is how do we make sure that we can follow the decision-making process. The second one is disclosure. Let's be clear on when and how we used AI. I was very transparent to Peter and the other trainers that I was using ChatGPT in my training. If they said, Kenny, that's not, you're missing the learning point, I would probably not use it. But it is about transparency. You probably saw that in the images that I used in my presentation, where it is AI generated, I put a text that it is generated by DALL-E, for example. So transparency is another aspect. And then it's about responsible use of AI. Again, those people who with a technical background usually are a bit better inclined to assess the risks involved in using AI. That's why it's important to at least study up a little bit so that you can understand the power of these tools, but also where the shortcomings lie. Again, for example, this pleasing AI. It could go very wrong, and this is an example that happened in the Netherlands a few years ago, where you start using AI, this is not ChatGPT, but some own developed data analysis, where they started using AI to assess if somebody was a fraud for tax reimbursements for childcare. And so the AI was using data to predict if somebody was a fraud. And what happened is that the first 10 times, people are very careful checking the output, right? But if it turns out it's right the 10th time, you become less critical the 11th time and the 12th and the 13th. Humans are not very good at continuously checking the same thing. So we become complacent. Basically, you have an AI that's then saying, okay, we think this is a fraud. And people say yes, because they don't understand how the AI arrived at that decision. And of course, it was wrong because it was biased on the data it was used to make that model. It was trained, and it starts making assumptions, right? And it does racial profiling, for example. So this caused a big scandal in the Netherlands. So we can come back in the panel on how that works with biases and training models and so on, but it's one of the things to keep in mind. So the last thing I want to tell you before we go into the break is that this part of AI is being unexplored. I saw many of you have said in the survey that you are using or have used an AI tool in your personal work or a personal productivity for your work. And yeah, this is a recent report, and I think one of the colleagues will also share about this. Yes, many people are using it and exploring it, but when we talk about professionally being part of what we do, that uptake is still fairly low. And it could be because we're hesitant and we're afraid, we don't know exactly when and how, where to use it responsibly. It could be because we're not familiar with it, or we don't know where it could be of added value. And that's one of the things I would like to take into the panel discussion after the break, is this discussion of where do we see potential, what is stopping us from using that potential, personally, ethically, and what should we do about it? And after the break, I think we will talk with the panelists about those subjects. So that was a rapid introduction of 5 years of research in 40 minutes, but I hope it helped people at least to get on the same page. And with that, I'll hand it back to Lucien.
Thanks a lot, Kenny. Really a brilliant introduction. I'm sure the nearly 100 people online